Snow fell gently over the small town of Winter Vale, blanketing rooftops and streets in a pristine layer of white. Christmas lights flickered in windows, casting a warm glow on the frosty panes. It was Christmas Eve, and the townsfolk were gathered in their homes, sipping hot cocoa and exchanging laughter. Except for one house. At the edge of town, an old Victorian mansion stood in eerie silence. The house belonged to the Graysons, a family known for their reclusive nature. Rumors swirled around them like the winter winds. Some said they were cursed. Others claimed they practiced dark rituals. No one had seen the Graysons in years. But the lights were on this Christmas Eve. Four friends, fueled by eggnog and teenage bravado, stood outside the Grayson mansion. Marcus, the leader of the group, smirked as he held up a flashlight. "All right, you scaredy cats. The dare is simple. Go inside, bring back something from the house, and you're a legend." Lucy crossed her arms, her breath visible in the cold air. "This is stupid, Marcus. What if someone's still living there?" "No one's lived here for years," Marcus replied. "Come on, it's just for fun." Reluctantly, Lucy, her brother Ethan, and their friend Claire followed Marcus up the creaking steps. The front door, surprisingly, was slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open, the hinges groaning like a wounded animal. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of decay. The grand foyer was illuminated by a dim chandelier, its bulbs flickering as though struggling to stay alive. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banister coated in dust. Faintly, the sound of a piano echoed from deeper within the house. "Someone's here," Claire whispered, clutching Ethan's arm. "No way," Marcus said, his voice wavering. "It's probably just the wind," but as the haunting melody of Silent Night drifted through the air, the group knew they weren't alone. As they ventured further into the house, they passed a series of portraits lining the walls. Each one depicted a member of the Grayson family, their expressions unnervingly lifelike. The eyes seemed to follow the group as they moved, glinting in the flickering light. "Let's just grab something and get out," Lucy urged. Marcus nodded and led them into what appeared to be a sitting room. The piano's melody grew louder, though no one could see the instrument. On a table, a small, ornate music box caught Marcus's eye. He reached for it, but as his fingers brushed the surface, the room's temperature plummeted. The door slammed shut. The friend screamed and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The piano music stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy. "Who's there?" Ethan shouted, his voice trembling. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman in a tattered black gown, her face obscured by a veil. She held a candle that cast flickering shadows on the walls. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you disturb our Christmas feast?" "We didn't mean to," Lucy stammered. "We'll leave, I swear." The woman tilted her head, and though her face was hidden, they could feel her gaze piercing them. "You cannot leave. The feast has begun." The portraits on the walls began to change. The painted figures turned their heads, their mouths stretching into ghastly grins. The room filled with the sound of laughter, cold, hollow, and inhuman. The friends were pulled into the dining room by an unseen force. A long table was set with rotting food and cracked china. Around the table sat the Grayson family, their bodies decayed yet animate. They gestured for the newcomers to sit. "Join us," the veiled woman said. "It's tradition." Claire tried to scream, but no sound came out. The music box Marcus had taken began to play on its own, the haunting tune filling the room. One by one, the friends were forced into chairs. Their bodies felt heavy, their limbs no longer under their control. The Graysons raised their glasses in a toast. To new family, they intoned in unison. The next morning, the townsfolk found the Grayson mansion just as they remembered it, dark, decrepit, and abandoned. But in the grand dining room, new portraits adorned the walls. 4 new faces stared out, their expressions frozen in silent terror. And in the corner, the music box played on, its melody echoing through the empty halls. The town of Frosthaven prided itself on its grand Christmas celebrations. Every year, The townspeople would gather in the central square to light the enormous Christmas tree, a tradition that brought joy to everyone. But this year, the tree was different. 3 days before Christmas, a box appeared in the town square. It was wrapped in crimson paper with a gold bow, sitting ominously where the Christmas tree would normally be placed. No one knew who had left it there, but curiosity quickly turned into excitement. Maybe it's a gift for the whole town, children speculated. Mayor Hargrove, ever the practical man, decided to open the box in front of everyone. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden tree. Its branches twisted unnaturally, and tiny figures hung from them. Not ornaments, but miniature people, their expressions carved in exquisite detail. "How unique," the mayor said, though unease flickered in his eyes. Despite the oddity, the townsfolk decided to display the wooden tree at the center of the square. That night, the air grew colder than ever before, and whispers seemed to drift through the wind. Eliza, a young baker, was the first to notice something amiss. As she walked home past the square, she swore she saw movement among the tiny carved figures on the tree. She froze, her breath visible in the icy air. One of the figures, a man wearing a hat, turned its head to look at her. She ran all the way home. By morning, whispers of strange occurrences spread through the town. People claimed to hear faint cries coming from the tree. Others reported shadows moving around the square at night. But when the townsfolk gathered to inspect it, the tree looked as it always did, small, wooden, and innocuous. On Christmas Eve, the mayor's son, Peter, went missing. His hat was found lying at the base of the wooden tree, but there was no other trace of him. The town's jovial atmosphere turned to fear. Families locked their doors and windows, and the square was left eerily empty. That night, the tree grew. Its once small branches stretched upward, twisting and curling unnaturally. The tiny figures multiplied, their expressions frozen in silent agony. Among them was a new figure, a boy wearing a familiar hat. Eliza couldn't ignore the growing dread. Armed with a lantern and her courage, she ventured to the square. The tree now towered over the square, its grotesque branches spreading like skeletal fingers. The figures hanging from it seemed to writhe, as if trapped in eternal torment. "What are you?" she whispered. The wind howled in response, carrying a voice that sent shivers down her spine. "We were once like you, bound by greed and selfishness. Now we serve the tree." Eliza realized the truth. The tree was cursed, feeding on the souls of the selfish and wicked. But it wasn't satisfied. It wanted more. Eliza knew what she had to do. She gathered the townsfolk, explaining the curse and urging them to come together. They worked through the night, dismantling the wooden tree and carrying the pieces far into the forest. With each piece burned, the whispers grew louder, then abruptly ceased. When the sun rose on Christmas morning, the square was empty except for ashes. The missing townsfolk, including Peter, returned, though none could remember where they had been. The people of Frosthaven never forgot that Christmas. They learned to cherish their traditions, not out of habit, but out of love and unity. And though they decorated a new tree every year, they always left a small space at its base, a silent reminder of the cursed tree that had once demanded their souls. In the small village of Evergreen Hollow, Christmas Eve was always a time of joy and celebration. Children would sing carols in the snow, families gathered around roaring fireplaces, and the church bells would ring out in harmony. But there was one house that remained dark and silent every year, the old Blackwood Manor. The house had been abandoned for decades, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in creeping ivy. The villagers spoke of the Blackwood family's mysterious disappearance one Christmas Eve long ago. Whispers of curses and ghostly apparitions surrounded the manor, and no one dared to go near it. But this year, something changed. Christmas Eve brought a fierce blizzard that blanketed the village in an impenetrable shroud of snow. The power went out, plunging Evergreen Hollow into darkness. The only source of light was the faint glow coming from Blackwood Manor. Curiosity got the better of a group of teenagers, Sophia, Jack, Mia, and Liam, who decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and wrapped in heavy coats, they trudged through the snow toward the eerie glow. "Are we really doing this?" Mia whispered, clutching Jack's arm. "It's probably just someone playing a prank," Jack replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "We'll check it out and leave." Sophia, the boldest of the group, pushed open the creaking gate. The manor loomed before them, its once grand facade now a crumbling shell. The front door was slightly ajar, revealing flickering candlelight inside. "Let's get this over with," Liam muttered, stepping inside. The air inside the manor was bitterly cold. Dust-covered furniture sat eerily untouched, and cobwebs draped the chandeliers. But what struck them most was the feast laid out on the dining table. Plates of steaming food, glasses filled with wine, and a roaring fire in the hearth made it look as though the house was waiting for guests. "This is impossible," Sophia said, running her hand over a perfectly polished glass. "No one's lived here for years." A low, melodic hum filled the air, sending chills down their spines. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then, the candles dimmed, and the hum turned into a voice. "Welcome home," it said. The teenagers froze as the shadows in the room deepened. A figure emerged, translucent and ethereal, dressed in 19th century finery. It was a woman, her face pale and her eyes sunken. "You've come to join us," she said, her voice a haunting melody. "The family has been waiting." The group tried to back away, but the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The ghostly woman smiled, her face twisting into something grotesque. "Every year, we welcome new guests," she said, circling them. "You will stay, as we have stayed, to celebrate Christmas forever." The walls began to pulse as if alive, and the portraits lining the room turned their heads to watch. The hum grew louder, a cacophony of voices crying out in anguish. The teenagers screamed, but their voices were drowned by the growing chaos. "We need to get out of here," Jack shouted, pulling at the door handle to no avail. Sophia noticed an old book on a nearby pedestal. Its cover was embossed with strange symbols, and it seemed to glow faintly. Desperate, she grabbed it and flipped through the pages. Inside were incantations and drawings of the manor. "This house is a trap," she said, her voice trembling. "The family, they sacrificed themselves to bind their souls here. It's feeding on us. How do we stop it?" Liam asked, panic in his eyes. Sophia found a passage about breaking the curse. "We have to extinguish the fire." The teenagers fought their way to the fireplace, the air growing heavier with every step. Shadows clawed at them, whispers filled their ears, and the ghostly family appeared, trying to block their path. Jack grabbed a heavy candelabra and swung it through the specters, which dissipated with shrieks of rage. Sophia reached the hearth and threw a nearby pitcher of water onto the flames. The fire hissed and sputtered before dying out completely. The manor trembled violently, and the ghostly figures let out a final, ear-splitting wail. One by one, they vanished into the darkness, and the house fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the front door creaked open. The group stumbled out into the snow, gasping for air. The glow from the manor had vanished, leaving it dark and lifeless once more. "Let's never speak of this again," Mia said, her voice shaky. The others nodded, too shaken to argue. As they walked back to the village, the church bells began to ring, signaling the arrival of Christmas morning. For the first time in years, Blackwood Manor stood truly empty, its curse finally broken. But deep in the forest, a faint hum could still be heard, carried by the wind, as if the spirits were not quite ready to rest.